What's going on, my friends? Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to continue our series through the Federalist Papers, and this one is a big one because Federalist number 40 gets right into the question that still matters right now in America. What happens when government is broken, the rules aren't working, and the people have to decide whether to cling to procedure or to preserve liberty? That is the heart of Federalist 40. In this essay, James Madison is answering one of the most serious criticisms leveled against the Constitutional Convention. And that was in 1787, for those who don't remember. Critics were saying the delegates in Philadelphia had gone too far. They were sent there, supposedly, just to revise the Articles of Confederation. But instead, they came out with an entirely new constitution. So the charge was simple. Did the convention exceed its authority? Did the founders effectively ignore the rules they were given? And if they did, what does that mean for the legitimacy of the Constitution itself? Now, that might sound like a technical procedural dispute, but it's much bigger than that. Because Madison's answer touches on the nature of political authority, the sovereignty of the people, the failures of weak government, and the idea that liberty sometimes requires structural reform before it can be defended. And that connects directly to the Second Amendment. Because if there is one thing the founding generation understood, it was this. A free people cannot preserve their rights under a government that is either too weak to function or too detached from the people to remain legitimate. So today we're going to break down what Madison says in Federalist 40, why he says it, what problems he's answering, and how it ties into the broader American understanding of liberty, self-government, and yes, the right to keep and bear arms. So let's get into it. To understand Federalist 40, you have to understand the criticism Madison is responding to. Under the Articles of Confederation, the United States was not really a strong national government. It was more like a loose alliance of states, and Congress had limited authority. It could not effectively tax. It struggled to regulate commerce, and it had no meaningful executive branch. It had no real independency when it comes to the judiciary, and it had a hard time enforcing national decisions. The country was unstable. It was financially weak, politically fractured, and vulnerable in both internal issues and external issues. The Annapolis Convention of 1786 had already pointed out major defects, especially in trade and interstate coordination, and that led to the Philadelphia Convention in 1787. Now here's the issue. The delegates were, in a formal sense, commissioned to revise the Articles of Confederation. Critics of the proposed Constitution argued that the convention had not merely revised the Articles, it had scrapped them and written something new. Therefore, the convention had acted illegally or illegitimately. And that was the anti-federalist attack that Madison is addressing in Federalist 40. And let's be honest, on the surface, the attack had some force to it. If you send people to amend a document and they come back with a replacement system, people are going to ask some questions. And Madison knew that. So in this paper, he does not dodge the issue, he takes it head on. Madison's basic argument in Federalist 40 is that the convention's actions were justified because the real mission was to save the Union. And the Articles of Confederation were so defective that merely patching them would not solve the problem. In other words, Madison says, let's stop pretending this was about narrow wording and technical instructions alone. The real question is whether the convention acted in service of the nation's survival and the people's liberty. He argues that if the articles were inadequate to secure the ends of the government, then proposing a stronger structure was not a betrayal of the mission, it was a fulfillment of it. That is such an important founding era point. Madison is not saying procedure doesn't matter. He's saying that procedure exists for a purpose. Government is not a machine made sacred by its paperwork. Its legitimacy rests in whether it serves the people and it preserves the political community. And that's the deeper principle. He points out that the convention's authority came from several overlapping sources. Resolutions from the states, the growing recognition of national crises, and ultimately the people themselves who would decide whether to ratify the Constitution or not. And that last part matters the most. Madison's argument is that even if critics wanted to nitpick the exact instructions given to the delegates, the proposed Constitution was not being forced on the country by decree. It was being submitted to the people through ratifying conventions. So the ultimate authority was not the delegates alone. It was not Congress alone. It was not the state legislatures alone. It was the people. And that right there is one of the most foundational American ideas of all. Federalist 40 reinforces something Madison and the other founders believed deeply, that the people are the true sovereigns. And government officials are agents. Legislatures are agents. Delegates are agents. Constitutions themselves are instruments through which the people establish political order. So when Madison defends the Constitution, he's really appealing above all procedural objections to the highest source of political legitimacy in America, the people acting in their sovereign capacity, which is a huge constitutional principle. The Constitution was not legitimate because every bureaucratic box was checked in some sterile administrative sense, but it was legitimate because it was ultimately submitted to the people for approval. And that's why ratification conventions mattered so much. They bypassed normal legislative channels and appealed directly to the people in the many states. And that matters when we start to think about the Bill of Rights as well, because the Bill of Rights, including the Second Amendment, is not a gift from government. It's a recognition of pre-existing rights retained by the people. The government does not create those rights. The government is created in the shadow of those rights, and it's limited by them. Federalist 40 is not about guns directly, but absolutely is about who holds ultimate authority in a free society. And the answer is not Congress. It's not the courts. It's not the bureaucracies. It's not executive agencies, guys. It's us. It's we, the people. We hold the power. We've forgotten that. And the principle is the bedrock under the Second Amendment. One of the mistakes people sometimes make is assuming that the founders only feared strong central government. It's true, but it's only half true. They also feared governmental weakness because weakness can destroy liberty as well. And a government too weak to govern cannot protect rights, cannot defend the nation, cannot resolve conflicts between states, cannot establish justice, and cannot maintain domestic tranquility. That is part of Madison's logic in Federalist 40. He's saying that the Articles had become structurally incapable of accomplishing the ends of the Union. And when the system itself becomes unable to preserve the public good, refusing reform in the name of procedural purity becomes dangerous. That is a very nuanced founding position. They did not believe in government for government's sake, but they did believe in a constitutional order strong enough to preserve freedom. And that tension is incredibly relevant to the Second Amendment because the Second Amendment exists in a system that assumes two things at once. First, government must be strong enough to protect the nation and maintain order. But second, government must never become so powerful or unaccountable that it can crush the people it was created to serve. That balance is one of the defining themes that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights runs on. Federalist 40 shows Madison defending a strong federal framework, but not for the purposes of erasing liberty. It's quite the opposite. He believed liberty required a structure capable of enduring. Because rights on paper mean very little if the constitutional system surrounding them collapses into dysfunction, into factional chaos or arbitrary power. The major theme in Federalist 40, should you choose to read it yourself, is Madison's rejecting the overly technical objections that miss the real stakes. He basically says critics are obsessing over whether the convention stepped beyond a narrow instruction while ignoring the catastrophic condition of the country. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Think about today. We see people manipulate procedure and language and institutional ambiguity not to preserve liberty, but to evade the real constitutional question. Madison wants readers to focus on substance. Did the convention act in a way that was responsive to the nation's crisis? Did it propose a system more likely to secure union and liberty? Was that proposal then placed before the people themselves? If so, then the charge of illegitimacy collapses. And this is very important for modern constitutional analysis as well, because a lot of the attacks on the Second Amendment operate the same way Madison describes. They often avoid the core principle and bury the issues in process, bureaucracy, balancing tests, administrative discretion, or selective historical framing. But at the center of the debate is still the same basic question, like who is sovereign, the people or the ruling class? The founders' answer was clear. Government is legitimate only so long as it remains a servant of a free people. And the right to keep and bear arms is one of the constitutional reminders that the people are not subjects. Now let's make that connection with the Second Amendment a little more explicit. Federalist 40 does not mention the Second Amendment because, like I say, in every one of these, the Bill of Rights has not been added yet. But it is absolutely connected to the constitutional philosophy that made the Second Amendment necessary. Here's how. Madison's argument depends on the idea that the people are the ultimate source of authority. The Second Amendment reflects that same assumption. An armed citizenry is not just about hunting, sport, or even individual self-defense in a narrower sense. At the founding, it was tied to the broader idea that political power begins with the people, who retain both rights and responsibilities. Federalist 40 is written in the defense of the constitutional legitimacy, but the broader founding project never abandoned suspicion of centralized force. The Constitution created a stronger federal government, yes, but the Bill of Rights was quickly demanded because many Americans wanted explicit protections against abuse. The Second Amendment is one of those protections. Another important point in Federalist 40 is Madison's insistence that legitimacy comes through consent. The convention proposed and the people decided. That's a big distinction. The delegates did not crown a ruler. They didn't seize permanent authority. They did not impose a constitution by force of arms. They offered a framework and then sent it out to the people for ratification. That means the Constitution was born not simply from elite drafting, but from public consent through specially elected conventions. Now, when government today acts as though constitutional rights can be regulated out of existence by administrative agencies, hostile courts, or temporary political majorities, it violates the original logic. The Second Amendment is part of a constitutional bargain ratified by the people. It's not a second-class right. It's not an embarrassing relic. It's one of the retained guarantees that mark the limits of legitimate power. So when we read Federalist 40, we should hear Madison saying something broader than just the convention was okay. We should hear him saying that political legitimacy comes from the people. Constitutional design must serve liberty, and formal institutions exist to secure the ends of self-government, not replace them. There's also a warning in this paper, and it's one that we should probably appreciate here. Madison is defending the convention from the accusation that it violated technical limits. But notice what he's not doing. He's not arguing that political actors may ignore all constraints whenever they think they have a good reason, like Congress does today. He's not endorsing lawlessness from the top down, like Congress does today. They all ran on transparency. They all wanted the Epstein files released and the names to come out. Yet they just voted overwhelmingly to protect their names from coming out from the sexual abuse slush fund that Congress keeps. They steal our money to cover their actions, and they want no transparency. Madison is justifying extraordinary constitutional action because extraordinary national failure is a thing, and because the final decision was returned to the people. Today, too many government actors claim flexibility for themselves while denying it to us, we the people. Agencies reinterpret laws that they were never elected to write. Courts invent standards that were not found in the text. Politicians claim emergency powers whenever it's convenient. And bureaucracies stretch definitions to regulate conduct that the Constitution protects. Now let's go one layer deeper. Federalist 40 is not specifically about militias either. It sits inside a constitutional moment where the idea of the militia was inseparable from the concept of Republican liberty. The founders generally understood a militia not as a permanent professional state force, but as the body of the people, trained and capable of bearing arms. And why does that matter here? Because Madison's whole argument depends on popular sovereignty and Republican legitimacy. And in the founding mind, the Republic was safest when the people themselves remained politically primary, and not when all coercive force was monopolized by a distant ruling apparatus. It's one of the reasons the Second Amendment later takes the shape it does, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. That's not random wording. It reflects the same constitutional world Madison's defending in the Federalist Papers, a system where liberty is preserved by a combination of structure, consent, decentralization, and a people who are not wholly dependent on government for their security. I want to thank Blackout Coffee for supporting the efforts here, not only on this channel as a whole, but specifically here in the Federalist Paper series. If you enjoyed this breakdown, support them. They're making it possible. blackoutcoffee.com/GNG. Code GNG10 will save you some money. Great coffees, teas, hot chocolates, roasted right here in Florida. It's a pro 2A company. We give thousands and thousands of dollars back to Gun Owners of America and Firearms Policy Coalition and the Second Amendment Foundation, who then used those funds to sue the government on behalf of the Second Amendment. So I thank them for that, and thank you for your support of that. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. Hit the like button and share this with somebody who wants to understand not just what the founders wrote, but what they really, really meant, what was on their hearts and minds, and why it still matters right now. Let me know in the comments, do you think Federalist 40 is one of the clearest examples that the founders placed ultimate sovereignty on us, we the people, not in government institutions? Let me know. I'll see you on the next one. Stay armed, stay free. God bless you. Take care.